4 years earlier, when Dad's knee gave out and the medical bills piled higher than the snow outside, I told myself I'd come home just for a little while. Just long enough to steady things. But temporary has a way of stretching. Weeks became months. Months became years. I was the one who climbed the roof in the dead of winter, hammer in one frozen hand, flashlight in the other, patching leaks while the wind cut straight through my coat. I was the one who drove Dad to endless doctor's appointments, sitting for hours in waiting rooms that smelled like bleach and fear. I was the one at the power company counter, begging for another extension, sliding every last dollar of my paycheck across scratched linoleum counters just to keep the lights on. Every paycheck I earned disappeared into this house. Every weekend I had was spent on repairs, tightening pipes, sealing windows, fixing the old truck when it refused to start in the cold. Meanwhile, Mark, my younger brother, spent those same years pitching one half-baked startup idea after another. An app that delivers snow cones in the winter. A social network for dogs. He never held a job for longer than a season, but Mom would smile at him across the table and say, "He's got such an entrepreneurial spirit. Just wait, you'll see." And Dad, he stayed quiet, always quiet, the kind of silence that cut deeper than words. He never told Mom to stop praising Mark. He never once looked at me and said, "Thank you." So I carried the weight alone, mortgage, bills, repairs, medicine, and through it all I kept telling myself, this is what family does, you carry each other. But deep down I think I already knew the truth. I wasn't carrying a family. I was carrying a house full of people who didn't see me at all. It happened on a Sunday evening. The table was crowded with aunts, uncles, cousins, the kind of gathering where the smell of roast chicken and laughter is supposed to mean warmth. Except warmth was the last thing I felt. Mom's voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "You know, Alina's still at home. She just hasn't gotten on her feet yet." The room went quiet for a beat, forks clinking against plates. Her words hung in the air, sour and heavy, and then I felt it, every eye sliding toward me. Not with respect, not with gratitude, but with pity, with judgment. My chest tightened. I wanted to shout, "Not on my feet. I'm the one keeping the lights on in this house. I'm the reason the roof hasn't caved in. I'm the reason Dad even gets to his appointments." But I didn't say a word. And the silence, that silence, was louder than anything I could have screamed. One of my uncles let out a nervous laugh like maybe it was all just a joke, but no one corrected it. No one said, "That's not true." Instead, I heard my cousin lean toward her husband, whispering just loud enough for everyone at that end of the table to hear. "She's almost 30, right? Still living at home." Heat rose up my neck. My hand trembled around the glass I was holding. I kept my face blank because I knew the moment I broke even a little they'd use it against me. And then came Mark, my younger brother, my mother's golden child. He leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at his lips, and said, "Maybe Mom's right. You should grow up. Sis, get your own place." A couple of relatives chuckled. Others avoided my eyes, pretending to be fascinated by their mashed potatoes. Not one person, not one spoke up for me. And in that moment, it hit me harder than any insult ever could. They weren't just ignoring what I had done. They were erasing me. The room buzzed again, clinking glasses, fake laughter, the sound of a family celebrating. But inside my chest, something cracked wide open. I didn't feel like part of that table anymore. I felt like the ghost they'd already buried and forgotten. That night, the house was full of laughter and music. Plates clattered in the kitchen, the TV hummed in the living room. But upstairs, in my room, the same room I had slept in since childhood, there was only silence. On the bed sat a small duffel bag. I stared at it for a long time, my hands frozen at my sides. What do you pack when you've carried a family for years, and they've chosen to erase you? I didn't take much. Just my laptop, the one holding every robotics design I had poured my soul into. The hard drive full of sketches no one in my family ever asked about, a few changes of clothes, my grandfather's pocket watch still ticking faintly, and folded at the very bottom, the quilt my grandmother had sewn, patch by patch from scraps of our family's life. Everything else I left behind. The chipped mug I always drank from, the stack of books I'd collected over the years, even the coat I'd bought Dad when he couldn't afford one. None of it mattered anymore, not when I finally understood it was never mine to belong to. When the clock struck midnight, I lifted the bag onto my shoulder. The zipper rattled softly, louder, it seemed, than all the noise downstairs. I paused at the doorway. Through the walls, I could hear Dad's cough, a low, tired sound. For a heartbeat, I waited for him to call out my name, to stop me, to say don't go. But nothing came, just silence, the same silence he had given me all those years. I stepped into the hall. The stairs groaned under my boots as I descended. At the front door, the draft slipped through the cracks, carrying the sharp sting of winter. Outside, snow was falling thick, each flake catching in the streetlight as if the world itself was holding its breath. I pulled the door shut behind me, the latch clicking like a final verdict. Then I walked down the icy steps, each one cracking beneath my weight, until the warm glow of the house was just a blur behind me. I didn't look back, not once, because for the first time in years, I wasn't leaving as the daughter who owed them everything. I was leaving as the woman who finally realized I owed them nothing. And as the snow swallowed my footsteps, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not grief, not fear, but relief. Denver did not welcome me kindly. The studio I rented above a coffee shop smelled of burnt beans and leaking pipes. The ceiling sagged. The heater rattled like it was coughing its last breath. Some nights I fell asleep fully dressed, wrapped in my grandmother's quilt, my breath fogging the air, but it was mine. And for the first time, silence didn't mean punishment, it meant freedom. I worked shifts at the coffee shop downstairs just to cover rent. My hands smelled of espresso and dish soap, my shoes sticky from spilled milk. But every night, after mopping the floors and locking the door, I climbed the creaking stairs back to my studio and opened my laptop. That glow, the blue-white light of the screen, was the only lamp I needed. I poured myself into Robotics. Sketches spread across the floor, soldering wires tangled around coffee mugs. My first project, a compact rescue bot designed to crawl into places humans couldn't reach, collapsed tunnels, avalanche sites, earthquake rubble. No one in my family ever asked what I was working on. But here, in this drafty room, my designs finally had space to breathe. The world outside, though, wasn't impressed. Investors leaned back in glossy chairs, smirking. One laughed outright. Robots from a girl living above a coffee shop. Cute. Another tapped his pen against the table and said, "Why don't you focus on something practical? You're wasting your time." Doors slammed, rejections piled up like snowdrifts, but every no only pushed me harder, because I knew something they didn't. I had survived worse. I had survived my own family erasing me, so I kept coding, kept soldering, kept testing until my fingers blistered and my eyes burned. Nights bled into mornings, coffee into exhaustion, rejection into determination. And then finally one yes cut through the noise. A small grant, modest, barely enough to keep the lights on, but it was oxygen, and for the first time I could breathe. That first grant, it wasn't much. Barely enough to buy parts, pay rent, and keep the heater running through another brutal Denver winter. But to me, it was fuel. It was proof that someone somewhere believed. I doubled down, slept less, coded more. My hands shook from caffeine, my eyes burned, but my robot, the rescue bot I had dreamed of, finally came alive. And then came the test. A ski resort outside Aspen had suffered a small avalanche. Search teams needed extra eyes, extra tools. My bot crawled through the snow, its sensors glowing blue, mapping pockets of air, leading rescuers straight to two trapped skiers. Headlines followed. Tiny robot, big rescue. Startup innovator from Denver saves lives in the Rockies. For the first time, people weren't laughing. They were listening. Partnership offers trickled in, first from local emergency teams, then from state agencies. Within a year, my studio above the coffee shop turned into an office space with employees, engineers, designers, people who believed in the vision. And then NASA called. They were looking for autonomous systems to assist in off-world missions, machines that could navigate terrain no human had ever walked. Standing on a stage in San Francisco, under blinding lights and flashing cameras, I introduced Robotics, the company I had built from nothing but grit, rejection, and a quilt sewn from scraps. Reporters shouted my name, investors lined up. The crowd erupted, and backstage in the quiet of the green room sat that quilt, folded neatly, waiting as it always had. The same quilt I carried out of that house in silence was now the quiet witness to my triumph. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was winning. On a scale so vast, even the family who erased me couldn't ignore it. It didn't take long. Success has a way of drawing out the people who once turned their backs. One morning, the glass doors of Robotics slid open, and there they were, my mother and Mark. The lobby was a cathedral of steel and light, sunlight pouring through tall windows, reflecting off polished floors, but they looked small inside it. So small. Mom clutched her purse like it was armor, her smile stretched thin. Practiced. Mark hung a step behind her, shifting on his feet, his smirk gone, replaced with something that looked a lot like shame or maybe fear. "Alina," Mom began, her voice soft, almost sweet. "We're so proud of you. We always knew you'd do something great. Maybe we can start over. Family is family, after all." Her words landed heavy. Family is family. The same woman who erased every sacrifice. The same woman who called me dependent, a burden, a failure. Now reaching for a story she could rewrite. Mark finally spoke, his voice low. "You've built something incredible. Maybe we could be part of it." There it was, not pride, not love, but need. For a moment I studied them, their hopeful eyes, the cracks in their confidence. And then finally I spoke, calm, steady, unshakable. "No, you didn't know, you didn't believe in me, but I did." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Mom's smile faltered, Mark's gaze fell to the floor. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I simply turned, walked toward the elevator, and let the doors close between us. Upstairs, in my office, the quilt lay folded on the chair by the window, sunlight spilling across its faded patches. It wasn't just fabric anymore. It was proof. Proof that even the pieces deemed worthless could be stitched into something stronger, lasting, unstoppable. I no longer needed to belong in their story, because I had written my own. And that was the final, quiet victory. Sometimes, the people you sacrifice the most for will be the first to erase you. They'll rewrite your strength as weakness. They'll call your survival dependency. And when you finally rise, they'll come running back, not out of love, but out of need. Here's the truth no one tells you. You don't owe them a second chance. You don't owe them your success. You don't owe them anything. Because family isn't the people who share your blood. Family is the people who believe in you, even when the world laughs. And when no one else does, you believe in yourself. I walked away with nothing but a quilt sewn from scraps. And I built a future no one could take from me. So if you're watching this, feeling erased, feeling small, remember this. You are not their scapegoat. You are not their burden. You are the author of your own story. And when you finally write it, don't be afraid to close the door behind you.